welcome to the Roundtable Podcast. I am Shogun. Today we have a debate series event with my friend ztaco. Really looking forward to this one. We will be debating Anarchocapitalism, which is a perspective that he endorses, and Authoritarian Meritocracy, which is a perspective that I endorse, but this will not be one of our formal moderated debates. It will be an informal debate or dialectic format. That being said, please make sure you have followed us and subscribed to us on both YouTube and BitChute. You can also download the Podbean app and find the Roundtable Podcast there as well. Download those to listen on the go. But you got over 200 episodes of the Roundtable Podcast available on Podbean, BitChute, and YouTube. Most of all, join us on the Roundtable Discord server. We record this podcast every day at 8 Central, and you can also join our excellent Facebook group, Reddit page, and a heck of a lot more. But that being said, welcome ztaco. Thank you for joining me. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to talk about a cool topic.
Awesome. I'm excited as well. So the first part of the discussion will be a dialectic, meaning just me and ztaco will be going back and forth for some amount of time, and then after that it will be open to all the group, just to make sure we have a chance to kind of establish the framework. So on that line, you are an anarcho-capitalist by orientation, I believe. So someone had never heard that term before. How would you define it?
So it's just combining, basically, in the easiest way of putting it, it's just natural human freedom. But what it is anarchy, which just means you're not being ruled. And then capitalism, which means you have private property, voluntary exchange, original appropriation, such like that. That's all it is. It's a very simple ideology. Nothing more to it. We just don't want rulers, and we just want with a capitalistic lifestyle. But the main thing I endorse is just the anarchy. How people want to live after anarchy, that's up to them.
Yeah, and that's interesting you say that because thank you for that definition. So to establish my position, I'm an authoritarian meritocrat or meritocratic authoritarian, and in the same way as yourself, I don't care what happens after we establish authoritarian meritocracy, right? It could be communism, it could be anarchism, it could be democracy. All that matters to me is it's established along meritocratic authoritarian lines. So that's interesting. And just to quickly establish my point of view, meritocracy means rule by the most qualified, the most capable, the most competent, the most qualified. And authoritarian means essentially that the power that those individuals would have would not be subject to democracy or other constraints, right? So with great power comes great responsibility, as Spider-Man said, as I would say, with great responsibility must come great power. So that's my position. So before we get further into this, okay, so you told me that anarchism means no rulers but not no rules. The first point of confusion I have is how it's possible to say that you would have laws or rules without government's laws and police. So can you explain this a little bit?
Well, the ANCAP answer for that would be privatization of everything. That would basically be how the anarchist goes about, or for the capitalist sense. That's basically all I care about. It's just getting rid of the government and then going on from there.
Right, but my point is you told me when we were discussing earlier that anarchy did not mean lawlessness, and I would I would insist that it does mean lawlessness. However, if you were to say it isn't to mean lawlessness, you would have to establish an alternate system by which laws could be legitimately created and enforced without the government and police.
Yeah, so that's what I was going with it depends, like, how you set up your society. So, like, if you're, like, to set up, like, an anarcho-socialist society, usually they would use, like, direct democracy to come up with the rules or whatever. Anarcho-capitalist society would come up to it based on contracts, some contracts saying just basic human nature. Anarcho-primitivists, they sort of just want to live in the jungle and live free there. That's basically what Tyler Durden from Fight Club preached for. He just wanted everyone, like, to get rid of technology and just mankind sort of devolved away from that. And, you know, that's what I mean. There's so many different flavors. Again, I'm just part of the capitalist side just because I enjoy capitalism more than living in the jungle or socialism, and I believe socialism would eventually turn into capitalism in an anarcho-society. But rules, like I said, so for capitalism society, it would just be mainly for privately put by private law and private arbitrators and agreed upon everyone via contract. And then another thing I want to put, like you said, like, oh, how are rules going to be able to be decided with, without authority? So, like, imagine, like, you're traveling. You go to, like, a different country, like Japan, Europe, wherever you're going. You don't read the law. Most of the people I know, they don't read the laws of the country they're going to. They just sort of understand natural human nature, what's good and what's bad. And I don't think you need an authority with a gun to your head to tell you what's good and bad in life. And I think people can establish rules and community guidelines without having an authority with a gun to their head to tell them what they are, as per human history.
Right. So, just to establish the groundwork, anarchism is a system in which you would have no government, right? There would be no state. Whereas the government, the system that I propose is statist and governmentarian, right? I believe. So essentially, I think what we can agree on is currently in the United States exists, as well as around the world exists, bad governments, right? There are governments that are not optimal, they're not very good. Now, your solution, I think, would be to say because government is not good, there should be no government. And I've always said, my answer is the solution to bad government is not no government, but good government. So I would argue you should have a very powerful government in control of everything, but they should be very competent, qualified, capable, benevolent, well-trained, well-selected, etc. Whereas your point of view would be it'd be better to have none at all. Would that be something you agree?
100%. Just mainly because, like, a big debate with anarchy is minarchy or minarchism. That's like the least amount of government possible while still having a government. So there's always like that fine line, but I usually you cross the line into anarchism once you realize that by definition government's nothing but a monopoly on violence and coercion, which I believe you agreed with yesterday. And I just believe that society can function perfectly fine without an authority with a gun to their head 24/7, coercive 24/7, when in an anarchical system that isn't inherent to an anarchical system, as opposed to government where violence and aggression is inherent and supposed to be justified.
Right. So, okay, so the system that you would believe in would be in which people are not under any superior authority, but form their relations with one another on a lateral basis, right? So you're all on the same playing field, so to speak. But if I meet you, I could say, hey, ztaco, I want you to build me a shed. And you say, I'm a carpenter, but yeah, you got to give me 24 eggs. And that would be essentially the only kind of arrangement, right? Whereas in my system, there would be things like, top-down governmental agencies that are in charge of, for example, inspecting things to make sure they're safe or enforcing rules to make sure they're followed. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much correct. But the thing is, like, in my anarchical system, like, or in any anarchical system, well, no, not in every anarchical system, but mine in particular, you would have everything done privately. So everything that you're saying that the government can do with top down and everything, it can be done privately and not monopolistically and done voluntarily through exchange. And like you said with the carpenter, the main thing that we preach about is just voluntary exchange and original appropriation. And then that's all, it's just, like I said, it's just a simple ideology. We just want to be people that aren't aggressed upon constantly, and we can work with each other like we do pretty much every single day. And that's another problem with, like, people don't understand what anarchy is. They think, like you said, it's lawlessness. Every single day you perform anarchy, but government's basically like a third party in your anarchy life that just gets in the way. When in government life, they don't have anyone in their way, they just are the government. When in our life, because we live under the government, they're the third party and they get in our way. We don't want that third party. We just want to live free and not be aggressed upon, unlike a government when that's literally inherent to a government.
So now that we've established the basic positions, I would like to begin the more debate aspect of it. So I respect you, like you, and how you present yourself, but your ideas, in my opinion, are completely, not valid, in the sense, not that they're not valid that you have them, of course you're valid to have your opinion, but that they wouldn't work at all. And the reason I'm going to say that, I mean, I'm not I'm not making an appeal to authority or an appeal to that, right? But I'm a sociologist, social scientist by training, and so I think a lot more than most people do about, you know, how social systems run. And also, I have had the experience of running essentially two different servers, one of, you know, 4,000, one 3,500, basically, and actually trying to apply these kind of ideas and see whether they work or not. So I'm not saying you should give any special credence, just assume everything I just said was false, but that's just to provide the context. So you need authoritarianism, right? Because when it comes to decision making, it is infinitely more efficient to have an authoritarian system. That's why every military in the world has an authoritarian system, because they understand that if there's two armies in the field, and one says, my order is attack the left flank and deploy the tanks to the right flank, but then the other army says, okay, everybody's got to meet in a big circle, and you've all got to express your opinion, and everybody's got to consider everyone else's opinion, and then we've all got to collectively come to a holistic agreement where we all decide together that we're all going to do the same thing, and if we don't like something, we got to talk about it. By that time, you've already lost the war, right? Because that kind of holistic, community-based decision-making that would be required in an anarchist system is highly inefficient, it's slow, it's ineffective, etc. And even the system we have now of democracy is totally dysfunctional, because democracy is ruled by the majority. The majority always clusters to the center of a standard distribution or a bell curve. And what that means is the majority is the middle, the median, the mean, or the mediocre. And therefore, democracy is nothing more than less than mediocrity. And as it said, it's better to be in an army of donkeys led by a lion than an army of lions led by a donkey. And therefore, if you make decisions according to a democratic system, it won't be good decisions. So if you were like, hey, I have a tumor on my stomach, what should I do? And you were to ask your 10 friends at the party, and 9 of them say, oh, just drink a Coca-Cola every day. And then one of them says, you need to go get surgery, and that guy's a surgeon. That one guy's opinion automatically outweighs the 9 people who say go drink a Coca-Cola because he has the qualification. And that's why I believe in meritocratic authoritarian hierarchies, where it doesn't come down to a popularity contest, which is voting, and it doesn't come to a popularity contest or, you know, unity reaching contest, which is an anarchist system or holistic system. What should be the case is that whoever is well qualified to make the decision should automatically make that decision as the only one qualified to do so, and everyone else's opinion should be rendered nil. So if a guy comes in and says your child has cancer and needs it operated, and you say, no, I just got to rub salt on their feet, your opinion literally doesn't matter. And that's why authoritarian meritocracy is the only functional system, because it just says whoever knows what we should do must have the power and authority to do that thing. And if other people don't understand or don't agree, that should not matter. And that's where the authoritarian part comes in.
Just to touch a little bit on what you said about a community just wouldn't be able to organize and do everything as good as the military would. Just so you know, there are private militaries and private defense forces that you can hire that are trained to do that stuff. Mainly the communal way of doing things is in an anarcho-social society. That's just basically they want to give everyone the guns and just everyone to sort of fend for themselves. When in a capitalist society, it would just be you hire the people to do it, just like how the government hires people like BlackRock and other private military corporations to work for them and do their bidding. I mean, it's just basically you just be able to do that yourself. But just moving on to the main thing that I obviously have an issue against is the authoritarian government aspect of it. I just don't believe that most humans would agree explicitly to another person aggressing upon them 24/7, unless you have a situation where we have now, like in the United States, to where I almost agree no one would explicitly agree to living in the U.S. and abiding to the rules, but sadly there's a thing called a social contract that no one signed, but due to something called implicit consent that isn't even valid, everyone's dragged into this way of living, and that can happen basically with almost any governmental system, obviously depending on how it's brought up. But I have no issue with people voluntarily agreeing and explicitly agreeing to a government doing this to them, but sadly that doesn't happen nowadays. If that were to happen in your utopia, to where you believe everyone's gonna sign up to be meritocracy, authoritarily, whatever, under that type of living 24/7 with a gun to their head, I don't think people would sign up for that. I think people would sign up for natural human freedom without the gun to their head in a society that can function just as good as a government without the whole government aspect of it. And that's what people just don't understand is you can literally live the life you have now, going shopping, doing this and that, but you won't just have this government third party. And I know that you said like you just need this authoritarian nonsense to go over everyone just because like the doctor scenario laid out. But it all comes down to human freedom. If humans voluntarily don't want to fucking take a vaccine that's going to save their life 100%, that's on you, my dude. As long as the info is fully transparent and you want to do that, that's perfectly fine. But that's sadly not the issue. What's going on with governments around the world? People are just sort of born and dragged into that way of living, and then they're saying, okay, well, you're stuck here and you're living here and you don't like it, you can leave. Oh, it's not easy for you to leave. Oh, then you have to stay here and abide by our laws while we put a gun to your head. And if you don't listen to them, we throw you into a cage. Or we shoot you into the head, depending on what you did wrong.
Right. So, can you hear me clearly? Am I roboting at all?
Super clear.
Okay, just let me know if I am. So, the first thing I want to establish is the difference between three different things, because people sometimes mistake this, right? There's authoritarianism, there's fascism, and there's totalitarianism. And I just want to be clear, I am not a totalitarian, I'm not a fascist, I am an authoritarian. So what is the difference? Well, totalitarians believe they should be able to control every aspect of people's lives, right? That's the concept of the total control, right? I don't agree with that whatsoever. I think the government should exert the minimum possible interference and only interfere to the minimum level necessary, right? So we're not going to tell you what you can and can't do except when we have to. So that's the first thing I want to point out. So freedom is desirable in an authoritarian system. You want as much freedom as possible, as few restrictions as possible. But the only difference is we say that there is still a number of restrictions greater than zero. And that amount of restrictions requires both a legitimate source of authority and an empowered authority to carry that out. So, for example, we're not going to tell you can't let your children, read the Bible. Or we're not going to tell you can't let your children have a bubble bath, or you can't let your children have a cat, right? We have no concern of that. We'll never interfere. But we're not going to say that you can beat your children, or that you can rape your children, or that you can sell your children into prostitution. At that point, there is a necessary governmental intervention. So the government should never come in and say, don't give your daughter a bubble bath, don't let your daughter have a puppy, don't let your daughter paint her walls pink. That would be absurd, right? We'd never do that. But if there comes a point, which unfortunately inevitably always there will, where a person's raping their children, pimping their children out, harvesting their children, sacrificing their children for satanic rituals or whatever crazy shit may come about, there must, therefore, because such situations exist, always be a governmental agency who responds to them. So sure. when it comes down to anarchism, the kill shot to this is child abuse. Because people will say, well, hey, it's my house, it's my family, I have the right to do what I want in my house with my own family, and I agree. But there will be a case where there's someone who's, having all his friends over to give you $50 to, have a go at your daughter or whatever, right? As a horrible fact, but it's a real fact. And that's I'm sorry, but this is like a debate type thing, but we will open it up soon. So I know you have perspective on this. But I'm just saying that's the point at which anarchism is automatically disproven. Because in an anarchist system, there would exist no legitimate central authority who has the right to come into your house, make sure your children are safe, arrest you if you're hurting your children, break up a prostitution ring, make sure you can't have sex with a 10-year-old. By definition, only a state can do that. So once you start saying there should be no state, there should be no law, there should be no rulers, then you're essentially saying that kind of thing should be okay. And that's where the majority of people are going to part ways with you. And then your only response is going to be to say, we'd have private security. And as I've said to you again and again, private security is meaningless because private security by definition works for the highest bidder, and criminal organizations of that nature will always be able to outbid communities. So if there is, for example, a child trafficking organization who comes into a community anarcho-capitalist system, and wants to recruit new children into prostitution, they will not be stopped because there is no police officer, there is no law, there is no government. And then you'll say, oh, but we have private security. But the problem is this, child trafficker will have $100 million and you only have $1 million. And so he'll literally go to your private security and say, listen, I know you're working for this guy to stop me from raping his children, but I have 10 times as much money, so work for me. And then he'll just pay them more, and then he'll rape your children. And this is why you need a government, for your own well-being.
Yeah, that is beyond insanity. But I get that. I get the argument just because of obviously you not fully understanding sort of what anarchy is. Just so you know, this stuff happens when governments are around too, and they're actually exacerbated by government 24/7. So just so you know, government doesn't solve the issue. And like you said, with the private security agencies, who is going to hire a security agency with a reputation to where they're going to be taking bribes from child traffickers and child rapists? I think every human being knows that rape is bad, theft is bad, murder is bad, assault, trespassing, coercion. I think that is just natural human nature, as we've learned empirically throughout time. I'm not talking like objective morals or whatever. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying that every human universally knows that those are all bad. So if like say you catch wind of this stuff and you're gonna hire a private detective force to go and find out to make sure that this is actually going on, you find out like how it happens nowadays with detective forces, that there's something going on, a child sex ring, child rapist or whatever. You can hire people to go in there that have good reputations, that have a transparent record of every single thing they've done. Like it could be Yelp reviews, it could be this and that or whatever. But you're not going to be hiring someone that has the potential of taking bribes that are going to be going completely against you. I get that you say, well, if they pay you $100 million, this and that, they're not going to take it, mainly because, like in an anarcho-capitalist society, there's going to be insurance companies that are going to be behind these these private corporations and private agencies. Where these agencies most likely are never going to be able to make options of even able to take in bribes from criminals like that, because of insurance agencies, and no private agency is going to be set up with shady insurance agencies and shady corporations due to competition from the people that are going to buy the product. And that's just normal capitalism, is that competition is going to weed out all the fucking crazies that are taking bribes to help child rapists, when you can just have a well-reputed company go and solve the problem that say like, oh yeah, we've stopped like five child sex rings, we've saved 250 children. That happens nowadays, and just to say that government is going to stop that's absurd, because you hear it every single day, and to say it's going to be exacerbated without governments, it's insane in my opinion. But I get the point, but I don't think it's right.
So this is really strange, right? And this is why I was looking forward to this debate, because this is really baffling to me. Like, okay, so what you're saying is you won't hire a company that will quote unquote take bribes. But that's not the relevant concept, because in the scenario that you yourself have created, this is an anarcho-capitalist society where there is no government, there is no laws, there is no police, etc. So
there's no police.
Okay, so hold on. So private corporations have it's not a bribe, right? They're a private corporation. So they can either work for you or they can work for me. So let's say that you represent ztaco, the community of ztaco community number 1, right? And I represent the community of Sinaloa Cartel, Jalisco Cartel, or New Generation Cartel. That's my thing, right? So you are, ztaco community number 1, and I am Sinaloa Cartel or Jalisco New Generation Cartel, right? Now, the problem is that the solution you keep employing to the problems such as crime, human trafficking, organ trafficking, slavery, domestic abuse, violence, rape, murder, and all the other problems that exist is private security, right? And I was private security. I worked in private security. I know what that entails, right? I defended supercomputer stacks, right? I protected supercomputers. And I have I considered going into armored car protection, et cetera, and that whole line of private security career. So I actually understand what it entails and how absolutely and laughably and completely useless and pointless it is against problems such as human trafficking, organ trafficking, drug trafficking, cartels, rape gangs, et cetera, prostitution. It has no use against that at all. So it's not me, it's you who's saying that the solution to having no police and no laws and no rules and no governments is just private security. And what I keep trying to tell you is private security, by definition, works for the highest bidder. And there is no law, according to your system. So it's not bribes. It's not that they would be taking bribes. It would be that they'd be saying, we're a private mercenary corporation or security corporation, and we're working for the highest bidder. And you would say, okay, well, we'll pay you $100,000 a year to defend our community from the cartels. And the cartels would say, that's cute. We make $18 billion a year selling drugs, and we'll pay you $1 million a year rather than $100,000. So automatically, as a private anarcho-capitalist organization, any security organization, any mercenary organization, any possible kind of private police organization that you could possibly hire would automatically go and work for the organization that was paid more, which would always be the cartel, right? Because if the cartel makes $18 billion a year selling drugs alone, which they do, they can automatically outpay any suburban security whatever group that exists. This is what I've been trying to tell you. To keep going back to like private security as a solution for these problems is crazy, because these organizations will just simply outbid you. And then they can just be like, hey, you're working with this guy to protect this community. We want to take over this community. We'll pay you 10% more. And they'll just come work for him. But even if they didn't, they would still have an army of soldiers, mercenary soldiers, much more powerful than your own. And they could just say, exterminate them all. So even if they didn't betray you for money, which they would, because that's just the organization of anarcho-capitalism, they have no reason to be loyal to you at all. They only go to the higher bidder according to your own society. That's why it's such a bad idea. But even if for some weird reason they chose to defend you to the death, even though they got paid less, which they never would, the cartels would still just wipe you out and kill you. So this is why the only thing that will ever protect you from groups like organized crime and mercenaries and cartels is governments. And if you choose to reject the protection and legitimate authority of governments, you only choose to embrace slavery to cartels who are 100 times more vicious.
First of all, with your whole, if the cartel were to buy out the defense agency, that's where competition comes in. There's now one defense agency. Cool, they got hired the best and all that type of stuff, but there's also going to be other people, other good humans in other corporations that you could hire that would be able to protect you, that aren't going to sell themselves out to the cartel where they've already been buying out other private defense agencies. That's where competition comes in. There's always going to be other people there to help. Now I get that you say, well, then the cartels are going to have all these extra, all these better people, and they're just going to mow you down because you're a private defense agency that you're able to get because the cartel freaking bought all the good ones. You won't be able to defend yourself, and then you'd be overrun or whatever. That's what fucking government is, but it's government justifies it. You're all worried about cartels, Sinaloa, this and that, when the government itself is a cartel that justifies the evils that a cartel does. But in an anarcho system, those cartels, they aren't justified, they're just straight criminals. But sadly, under government, government isn't really labeled a criminal because they're able to do all the stuff, but yet they say that the main word is justified. They say they're justified in doing so, and I don't think you can ever be justified in being a cartel that, and you always worry about this power vacuum. Creating the state creates a power vacuum to where people can get in power. Like if you look at human history, if you look at Mao, if you look at Stalin, you look at Hitler, these are just people that got in power because of the power vacuum that is the state, and they were justified in having that power due to whatever system, democratically or whatever they got there. They're justified in doing that, when in an anarchist society, that wouldn't be justified. That's the main thing. The cartel thing can definitely happen in an anarchist society, but it happens 24/7 in a government society because government is inherently a cartel. And, since we're a bit of a conspiracy server here, I think we all understand that the government has done a lot to help go against, drugs and all that type of stuff, and all the shadiness they do with the cartels and everything. Government only aids and abets all this type of stuff that you're worried about. But you're just saying that it's okay because it's all under this veil disguise of the government, when it's all happening 24/7. Unlike in an anarchist society, it wouldn't be justified. It would just be straight criminals. I don't support criminal behavior, but you're justifying the criminal behavior because you say it's a government and that's for everyone's better good or whatever you say. Go ahead.
All right, so all I want to say is we can continue going back and forth indefinitely, and we will continue to do so, but I want to open it up for the audience if anyone wants to ask questions. So whatever, let's just make it an open discussion now. So does anybody want to ask anything? All right.
Do we just have to... Is it just asking questions, or is it like making a statement in defense or against the arguments here?
Conversation so far, and myself and ztaco could continue kind of indefinitely, but at this point I want to open it up. So if anyone wants to, ask a question, make a comment, make a statement on the subject, go ahead. Otherwise, we'll just continue.
I have a question.
Okay.
Am I unmuted?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I was wondering, what's your opinion on immigration? How would immigration be done in your society, ztaco, in your ANCAP society?
Open borders. Everyone's free to come in, but you just gotta agree via contract, or if you're like a socialist society, they can go about it however they want to do it. I mean, it all depends on the society you're going about. But open borders.
Okay. What about the idea of having some groups, or like almost like a guild that is centralized, if you know what I mean, like a group that doesn't have government control? So the police force and the military is obviously all under the government, but in a society that was anarchist, you could have something like an army of volunteers, of like loyal ideologues who believe in the experiment that is anarchy. Would you have something like that, like a black army, what I call it?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it like centralized. It would be decentralized, and that actually happened in the Swedish Pirate Party. They were just they were called something a swarm. So they weren't a centralized group of people, but it was all voluntary groups. It was a voluntary swarm. I forgot how exactly they call it, but yeah, swarm of people where they all volunteer work together, and they created the Swedish Pirate Party. And on less than 1% of the budget than every other political party, they got 12% of the vote. Obviously, they didn't win it. They're the Pirate Party, but the point is that they were able, with less than 1% of the budget, decentralize, voluntarily take 12% of the vote just to basically make a point that you can do it together voluntarily without all this funding from a bunch of, rich corporations feeding into the government.
So I want to reiterate, if I can, thank you, the point here, right? So your argument is if you were to remove government and law enforcement and legislation and social policy and all these things, you admit there would be a vacuum there, because you understand there would be a vacuum, but the postulation you make is that you could fill that with private security. Now, the problem with this is that private security, by definition, works for the highest bidder, right? They're not organized around a moral code. They're not organized around a legal code. They simply work for the highest bidder. They're mercenaries, right? So if you talk about mercenaries, private security, private policing, all of these, by definition, work for the highest bidder. And the problem with this is that, by definition, the highest bidder will always be organized crime, cartels, etc. Because as we said before, if a cartel makes $18 billion a year, there's no suburban community, right? So say if I have a suburban community right now, I used to live in a suburb, my suburb was safe and peaceful, and it was protected by the police. So if anything happened, I could call the police and be like, hey, this guy's trying to break into my house, and the police would come and deal with it. Now you're saying that would no longer exist because there would no longer be any authoritarianism, authority, or police or laws, so there would be no police. I couldn't just, if someone was breaking into my house, I couldn't just call 911. So either I have no money, in which I'm completely helpless and at the victim of anybody, or I have enough money to hire private security. Now, if I have hire private security, I can call them and they'll say, oh yeah, you paid this amount of money, we'll come and, try and talk to this guy while flashlights, while radios, right? Like I said, I worked in this business. But by definition, any organized crime group, cartel, mafia will have more money and will be able to hire more private security. And the only equalizing force there would be the police, the laws, the Constitution, your human rights, all of which are established only by law, order, authority, and power, etc. So what I really can't understand is why you don't understand that crime pays and crime is profitable and crime lords have lots of money. And if you abolish laws and governments and police that have like an interest in things like constitution or your human rights or their responsibility to oversight, and you just say, well, it'll be replaced by private security. Well, private security is of no use because the criminals have more money and they'll just hire the private security to work for them instead of you. And I've repeated this to you like 100 times today in text and in voice, and it's incredibly simple, right? So if I'm a criminal and I want to take your daughter from you and sell her into sex trafficking, and you say, well, there's no police, there's no laws, we got rid of that because we're anarcho-capitalists, but we hired a security guard to guard a house. I'll just say, hey, how much are these people paying you? And he'll say, 20,000. I'll say, I'll give you $1 million. And I'll say, no problem, sir. And you're saying that's a bribe, but it isn't a bribe because there's no law, there's no government. It's a capitalist, anarcho-lawless, capital by money system. So the system you're putting forward is superior to a benevolent government that actually cares for laws, people's constitution, is a purely mercenary system in which human life is valueless, money gives you the authority to commit any crime, and innocent people are helpless if they are not millionaires. It is honestly one of the dumbest things I've ever heard espoused as an ideology. And I mean no disrespect to you, but what you're establishing here is a system where the strong or the wealthy would treat everyone else as human cattle, and you would have no possible avenue of recourse if you didn't have money.
Yeah, I get that argument pretty much every single day, but obviously I just think you misunderstand what anarchy is, and that obviously comes down to probably a lot of nations not knowing a lot of, like the study of, like, what it is and everything. But competition, you keep saying, oh yeah, private security forces are going to be, it's going to go to the highest bidder, and you keep saying that you're not listening to what I'm saying. I'm saying competition is going to fix issues like that, mainly because if the highest bidder keeps going to cartel, there's going to be competition to where you can be like, okay, I can't buy these people, I can buy these people, and they can go forever. And that's just why I don't know what you don't get. This mainly, and you call it the stupidest thing you've ever fucking heard, or whatever you said. All anarcho-capitalism is basic human freedom, but then you want to insert into basic human freedom the thing that you're bitching about, which is a cartel or whatever. Government is a cartel, and what I want you to, I'll ask you plain out, how can you justify all the evils that government does when the cartels do all those evils, but you don't want the cartels? The only thing is that you're justifying all the evils of the government because you're saying it's benevolent, and then you're saying that I just want a bunch of lawless nonsense. First of all, there are going to be rules. There's private law. There's private defense. There's private police. All the things that government provides to you, we can do without the government. And that isn't nonsense. That isn't evil. That isn't not caring about humans and only the strongest will survive. No, government just makes all those evils that you're bitching about justified, but they just have it under the veil of a government. But then when you get rid of the government, all these issues that are still happening under the government, you're saying are happening under my system because I don't have a government. Government exacerbates all the issues and justifies them. That's my point. And to again go to your private defense thing, competition. You need to understand normal capitalism is competition. Not every private defense agency is going to be going to the cartel because there's always going to be others coming in that you could bid for a decent price and stuff like that. And then when it comes to wealth or whatever, if you don't have money, that's the beauty of anarchy, is that you can go to an anarcho-socialist system that has welfare set up in whatever way they want to set it up, and you can live there and it can provide you every single thing you need. And then when you're done there, if you want to, you can move to a capitalist system or you can go live in the fucking jungle. It doesn't matter. That's your own human freedom. But the problem with you is you're restricting everyone's freedom by saying you have a benevolent government with a gun to your head 24/7 because it stops all these child traffickers and evil, and the strongest will survive. When the strongest will survive is the government, and we're already all victims of the government, and we all know this.
So the thing that's so perplexing about this is you talk about things like competition. So you mentioned competition, right? And what does competition mean? Well, it can mean different things, but in an anarcho-capitalist society, it only means who can pay the most, right? Because there is, according to your own system, there is no government, there's no regulation, there's no oversight for corporations. So therefore, the only possible concept of competition is who pays the most. And this is what I've been retelling to you over and over and over again. And for applicable reasons, you can't understand the extremely obvious implication of it. Hold on. I'm still talking. It's okay. I gave you your turn. But the point is, when you talk about competition, they're not like, if you're a corporation who runs private security and you're offered two different contracts, one for 10 times more money or one for 1/10 of the money, you're obviously always 100% of the time only going to go with the one that pays 10 times more, because that is competition, right? There is no law, there's no ethics, there's no morality in an anarcho-capitalist system. There's only the anarcho-capitalist point of view, which is whoever pays more gets the service. So if I offer Blackwater or some kind of mercenary contracting security, I automatically, by definition, work for whoever pays most, because I'm not going to get shot and killed for less money, right? If what I'm offering is that I'm going to die and hold a gun and get my brains blown out, I'm going to work for whoever pays the most. And this is what I've been telling you the whole time. That will always be the cartel. That will obviously always be the mafia. It'll always be the organized crime. So, like, again, when I was, married, I was living in a suburban white picket fence, like, nice part of Canada, right? So let's say we have an anarcho-capitalist system. There's no police, there's no government. So this is my area. We live in Syracuse, right? So we go, okay, Syracuse. So Syracuse will come together as an anarcho system, and we'll hire some security. How much money do we have? Okay, we can bring up $500,000 a year. Oh, that's pretty good. We're pretty well off even, actually. We're pretty lucky people. We're, 500. So we got security guards. They drive around in cars. They have flashlights. They have radios. They keep an eye on shit. They make sure no teenagers are spray painting the garages. But if a cartel comes in and says, we're going to set up a meth manufacturing laboratory and a human trafficking organization here, all they would have to do, according to your system, not mine, yours, is simply go to the very same corporation that's already representing us and say, okay, we understand you're protecting this corporation with your patrols and your flashlights and your radios, which again I did as security. I know what that is. And you say, okay, how much are they paying you? Okay, 100,000. We'll pay you 900,000. According to your own definition of competition, they would automatically just sign a new contract and work for that person. So what you keep failing to understand, which is just like painfully, ridiculously simple, is when you establish what you call anarchism, it's actually oligarchy, right? Oligarchy is the rule by the rich. If you don't have a government that you have loyalty to, like I'm loyal to my government, I'm a patriot, I represent Canada, law and order is a value in and of itself. If I didn't believe in that, I could just take the highest bidder, and then boom, I'm working for the Hells Angels. Boom, I'm working for the fucking HA or the Indian Posse or whatever. It's so simple, right? It's like there is nothing you have available to you other than money, and organized crime will always have more money than you. This is why it's better to have a police system that's not based on how much money you have, it's based on what the laws are. like if you rape or kill someone, you go to jail regardless of how much money you have, because there's laws. But if you get rid of laws, it's like, oh, you can rape whoever you want as long as you can pay more money than the police. It's so silly, dude.
Shogun, what don't you understand that you can have private law? What do you think there was before government? Private law, private arbitrators. See, this lawlessness, that's just a straw man you're building up just to make me look bad. There wouldn't be lawlessness. There would be definitely rules, and depending on the society, the rules would be set up differently. Again, the main thing I preach for is anarchy. I just prefer a capitalist system just because I just prefer capitalism. And then my point of competition is that you're going to be bound to a contract to whatever goes. And I know you said, okay, well, they offer them 900,000, they're going to burn your contract and go to them. Okay, if they fucking do that, depending on what the contract is that you signed, you're probably going to be getting benefits back or whatever it is. And then that's where you have to understand about insurance companies behind these people too and everything that will be able to shut them down and quit funding to them and do all this type of stuff, which happens nowadays under government. You're building up all the stuff that isn't true about anarchy, and also you're forgetting the other side of the coin of all the evils government has done. And you're saying that you're worried about the evils that are coming from natural human nature. when that can all be solved without a government, but yet you want to have these evils done by government justifiably so that it will supposedly stop less of these evils, because I guess in my system it's just going to be nothing but fucking child rapists and nonsense, which is complete, and that's not even true at all. And that's why I don't understand with you, is that I don't think you fully understand what the system is. And that's why I'm glad that we're having this conversation, but then you're probably going to talk again and say, I'm not understanding what you're saying. But my point is that my whole thing is this pure human nature, volunteer exchange, human freedom, not with a gun to your head 24/7, and all the evils that you bitch about that are done in an animal society happen the exact same, if not worse, under a government system. As you can see, we're a conspiracy server. All we do is talk about conspiracies and crazy shit that what does? The government. What does NSA talk about every day? Stuff the government does with their intelligence agencies. What do you show every day? You show all the... Yesterday you're posting pictures of all the old types of warfare and everything. That's what stuff government and authorities can do. It causes nothing but warfare and nonsense and chaos. But they justify the chaos because it's a government. When in an anarchist society, it wouldn't be justified. It would just be straight criminals. And I just think it's just a miscommunication between the... I don't know if it's what's not clicking. I don't know what it is, but everything that the government does that you're saying can't be done in an anarchist system can be done privately, which is what private corporations do every day, but the government has monopolies over that stuff. Go ahead.
Okay, so all I'm saying is this, right? So here's the reality of it. You know, you don't have to agree or disagree, but I do understand this. So the state is established by whoever has the monopoly on the use of violence. Now, monopoly is determined by the practicality, not the ethicality of that. So nobody cares what's good or bad. It's who actually has the ability to kill. So if there's two people in a room and one person has a pistol and the other person doesn't, then that guy is the state. That is the raw truth of statehood. There is nothing more to it than that. It's whoever has the monopoly on the use of violence. So to say that you don't find the monopoly on the use of violence ethical is meaningless. It's like saying you don't like the fact the sky is blue. Nobody cares. It means nothing. It absolutely changes nothing. And even if you got every person on earth to say the sky should not be blue, it wouldn't change anything. And it's the same with the state. The reality is the state is created by whoever has the dominance on the use of violence. So if there's only two people in an elevator, the state is whoever wins the hand-to-hand fight. Right? This is why when you ask me who is the alpha between two, you put them both in a fucking elevator, you put them up 10 floors on a fucking skyscraper, and whoever comes out on the other side was the alpha male. That's how simple statehood is. It's who wins, Poland or Russia, Germany or fucking Ireland. I mean, that's all there is to it. Now, you may not like that and be like, that's not how it should be. It should be ethical. It's irrelevant. It's like saying fire shouldn't be hot, poop shouldn't be smelly, water shouldn't be wet. Nobody cares. It means nothing, right? So all that establishes statehood is dominance on the use of violence. And all I'm saying is that use of violence should always be constrained to the state, because the state is actually accountable to the people. The state has oversight. The state actually has ethics inherent in it, right? And the worst thing you could ever have is no state, because if there's no state, then you'll have a cartel state or a mafia state or a gang state or a crime state or a cult state. So there is no alternative. Like, what's so infuriating about anarchists like you is you think that, like, oh, we don't like the state, there should be no state. There will always be a state. If you were to tell me okay, so I'm on the 3rd floor of my building. If you were to tell me there's no more law tomorrow and we declared anarchism, then I would become the leader of my building tomorrow, because I'm more powerful than anybody else, and I would kill anybody who opposes me. And I would say, this is my building now. So when you say anarchism is good, you're just saying the strong should automatically oppress and dominate and control the weak. Because if you say, okay, let's get rid of the government, no more Canada, no more police, no more RCMP, no more government, no more policy. Okay, here's my axe. I'll chop your head off, you stupid idiot. I'm going to take everything you have. Your family belongs to me, and everything belongs to me, actually, because I'll kill you all. And the fact that you keep going back to, like, no, that's not really it. There would still be laws. We'd hire private security. I was private security. It doesn't work that way. It's so stupid, dude. Okay, so power always dominates less power, right? More power always has more power than less power. And power, by definition, is the power to kill. So you can't really oppose it. So you either have two choices. Do you have some kind of gentleman's agreement where we don't abuse power, which we call government? Or do you have no gentleman's agreement and heard over a cartel and they dissolve your daughter in acid in front of you in a fucking barrel? That's called the Mexican system. So what do you prefer, the Canadian system or the Mexican system? Do you want a cartel or do you want a government?
You're painting it like it's black and white, though, and I kind of want to say something to both of you guys. I have like a quote that applies to both of you, because I disagree with parts of what both of you are saying. So if it's okay, I just quickly say this quote. You just give me 2 minutes. Cheers. It's by the historian A.G.P. Taylor, and he wrote, I think it's a page about minarchism. He said, until August 1914, a sensible, law-abiding Englishman could pass through his life and hardly notice the existence of the state beyond the post office and the policeman. He could live where he liked and as he liked, and he had no official number or identity card. He could travel abroad or leave his country forever without a passport or any sort of official permission. He could exchange his money for any other currency without restriction or limit. He could buy goods from any country in the world on the same terms as he brought goods at home. For that matter, a foreigner could spend his entire life in the country without permit and without informing the police. Unlike the countries of the European continent, the state did not require its citizens to perform military service. An Englishman could enlist if he chose. The rest of this isn't really that important. The Englishman paid taxes on a modest scale, nearly £200 million in 1913-14, or rather less than 8% of the national income. Basically, it depends on the country you're living in. If you're living in a place like Mexico, it's always going to be a more violent place. And so there are problems there. But if you live in somewhere that's, back in the old days of England in the early 20th century, people were still kind of bound together by their community and their village, and the government didn't really have much power at all. But you didn't see a high crime rate like what we have today in London. You didn't see cartels like what there are in Mexico. People got along just fine. And that's where I disagree with you, Shogun, where you say it would instantly be chaotic lawlessness. And where I disagree with you, I keep forgetting your name, sorry, ztaco, is where you say that you should just let anybody in, because it requires a certain kind of peaceful, homogenous population like what Japan has to make a good society, in my opinion. And that's it.
I get the open border part. It's not like objectively you need to have an open border. I just prefer it just because people coming in would have to sign the contract to agree to live in the way of society or whatever and stuff like that. But the main thing that Shogun's not, we're just obviously butting heads on is he thinks that, like you just said, that automatically we're going to devolve into lawlessness and everything, and we're going to be like Mexico, so pick Canada or Mexico. You also have to understand that a lot of the cartels that are around nowadays sprung up due to the black market, which became in place because of governments. So these cartels have to work under the, in the black market, underneath the market to work. And as you know, governments, all government agents, all that, they go in there, they're all part of that stuff. They fund these cartels and everything and stuff like that, and they work in the black markets. In my society, completely free market, drugs and all that type of stuff would be completely not illegal and free to buy, because that's just what a free market is. There wouldn't be a black market which spawns cartels, which spawns freaking tunnels underneath countries to where you need border security to stop all the trafficking, when most of the time the border security is paid off, like you said, by these rich cartel people. But the border security, sadly, is ran and paid for by the government, when the government doesn't know shit and do anything right, because that's just what the government does. That's just inherent to the government, is that's why, with the post office and everything they do, everything that the government does, privatization can do better. But the sad thing is, government has a monopoly over most of the stuff, so no one can have a say, which is another problem with government, is the inherent monopoly. And like you said, that's just, saying like, oh, that, it's bad that a state is evil because, that's like saying the sky is blue. I'm an anarchist. I don't support anyone with a gun to my head. And you're saying that, like, oh yeah, if wars were stopped tomorrow and you're the strongest guy in your apartment, you take it over, whatever. I think that has a lot to do over the decades and centuries in human history of indoctrination of authority. As you know, since the pharaohs, we've been fucking under authority, and just in human nature, and not human human knowledge and teachings over the time via the trivium in Rome, and then moved on to now with the fucked up education system, telling them to be communists and everything, but their states and all that are great and everything. That has to do with a lot of indoctrination. A lot of people can't imagine a society without a state because there hasn't been much of a society without a state because the state has always been around having monopoly on force in it. And I just don't know how you can justify all the evil government does that cartels do privately in an anarcho system, except it's not justified unlike a government.
So the first thing I want to point out is the solution, in my opinion, right? Okay, so we both agree that current governments are not good, right? So, for example, the United States government has killed hundreds of thousands of people in Muslim countries in the Middle East that there was no reason they had to die, right? They didn't represent any threat to us. So we disagree on this with them. And we don't agree with the drug laws, right? That they banned all these harmless drugs like marijuana, magic mushrooms, and MDMA. It's fucking stupid, right? So we don't agree with this. But the disagreement we have is this. I say the answer to bad government is not no government, it's good government. And you say the answer to bad government is not good government, it's no government. And to me, this is a logical non-starter. It's like saying if you have a bad dad who didn't take good care of you, it'd be better to have no dad. We all know that's not true. The solution to having a bad dad would ideally be to have a good dad who did take care of you, right? And it's the same with government, etc. So anarchy represents a governmentarian value of zero. So you'd be saying in order to believe that anarchy made any sense, you'd have to be saying that government could not produce any outcomes better than zero, and that zero is the best outcome that any government could produce because no government was the best possible outcome. But if you had even like a somewhat competent government, it would have an outcome better than zero. So basically what you're saying is like the government that I've experienced was unsatisfactory, so I want no government. But in reality, even like a mediocre government would outperform no government. So it's like saying you'd rather have no car than a bad car rather than a good car. It's literally that simple how stupid it is.
Just to go on the dad idea that you brought up, a dad isn't inherently evil. There's good and bad dads. Governments are inherently evil because they put a gun to your head 24/7 and coerce you into obeying their laws. And if you don't obey their laws, oh bro, just fucking leave. Just get out of here. Yeah, you're not obligated to leave. So that's my main thing.
What? Here's something I want you to understand. Actually, I don't mean just you, but anybody. You always have a gun to your head. That's called the natural world, right? If there's anyone around you stronger than you, then you have a gun to your head, right? If me and you, or me and anybody else in this room is in a room, I mean, I can kill you. That's the actual fact. It's not that hard. So that's exactly why government is so important. Not because you don't want to have a gun to your head, but because you realize there is no other option. So the reason that people like you, I'm sorry, but the people like you have such an issue with this is you're like, we don't want a gun to our head. Okay, neither do we. But the reality is the strongest will always have a gun to head the weakest. So if I'm 6'3" and 200 pounds and my girlfriend is 150 pounds and 5'4", I have a gun to her head. I can punch her in the head. She's dead. And the same goes to any man weaker than me or whatever. And if I have a knife, then that's the case. Not a gun, that's the case. So this idea is like, we don't like force, we don't like coercion, so we don't like government. The whole reason for government is to restrict the extent of coercion through force and not just say, okay, we're not just going to let whoever has the most guns rule. We're going to have laws and orders. And you're like, we don't like laws and orders, so let's go back to anarchy. But all anarchy it does is enable pure rule by force. So currently we all agree, like, there should be a rule of law, there should be police, there should be investigation, there should be evidence, and we all agree. But if you're saying I want anarchism, I'm going to chop your fucking head off and rape your fucking wife and take your kids, and so is everybody else, because that's the only option that will then be viable in that system, right? If there is no laws in fucking fighting, right, think about UFC. If you have to fucking fight to win, we all have to agree to the rules. That requires the referee and the people who can decide on this. But if there's nobody to say that it's not against the rules to poke eyes out, then you all have to poke each other's eyes out, because otherwise he's going to poke your eyes out. And you're going to say, no, nobody will do that. They're too honorable. No, that's why we have a referee. That's why we have rules. Rules. Like, what is your problem with rules?
Can I say something quick before?
I want rules, and go ahead, try hard.
So, I mean, just, it's human nature to gravitate to people who are like you. Not in every sense, but in your friend circles, Discord servers, you could name a bunch of things. Now, that would happen in an anarchist society. People are going to band together based on common belief system. And then, some people are natural leaders. Some people are more intelligent. Some people are more driven, etc. The majority of people are going to look to these leaders, the engineers, doctors, for guidance. It just happens naturally. Now, then you get two groups of people who have completely different belief systems, ideologies, the way their society is structured. Now, what happens when those groups clash? What do? You don't like what they're doing, and you don't like the government. Oh, they got a gun to your head. They're telling you what to do. Well, you don't like what those people are doing, and you are going to hire private security, and they are literally going to take a gun and put it to these people's heads and say, you can't do this. What's the difference?
Self-defense is the difference. I mean, if you're hiring defense, if those people that have forces are aggressing upon you, the defense will put the gun to their head and shoot them. But I don't think you could hire. I mean, you could definitely hire mercenaries to go and kill someone, but it's not justified just because you'd be a fucking criminal. Sadly, government does this stuff, but they justify because, hey, they're the government.
I guess my point is, it's like governments just didn't exist all throughout time. They naturally formed through human evolution.
Not naturally.
Yes, no one. There was no governments. There was tribes. Whatever you want to say. They form naturally, and if you started an anarchist society, they would just naturally form all over again. You just basically want to reset the clock. That's it.
I'd just like to say real quick, too, that this idea, descending into this anarcho-capitalist world where everyone's now just expected to hire security, this is so absolutely unrealistically ridiculous. It's not even funny. First of all, the price of that, just hiring your own personal 24/7 watch security is the most absurd, outlandish thing ever. That is, you can do that, but it's expensive as fuck, for one. And not everyone can watch everyone, right? So there's just going to be people left out of that, right? And so that just makes it extremely unfair for the unfortunate people who aren't able to pay for a 24/7 round-the-clock private security team that you now just need to have. It's entirely ridiculous. This is entirely ridiculous.
Well, no, you wouldn't even need that. They would form naturally. People would start protecting their group for self.
No, it wouldn't.
Yes.
No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't just naturally we're in an anarcho-capitalist system now, and just naturally going to have a private security.
No, I'm not. I'm talking about people will do that for free. They will band together and protect their interest for free. No private security needed.
Okay, well, what happens when they don't do that? What happens when they don't band together?
Well, the people that don't band together are going to end up being ruled by the people that did band together.
So I'll try and touch on this from a different angle, because I think we've all kind of seen the problem with this, which is that if you put security just to the highest bidder, then the organized criminals will always outbid the peace citizens, right? So that doesn't work. But even if we tried to approach it from a different angle, right? So just use this server, as I often do, as a metaphor for social situations. So you would say, okay, let's say we made this server anarchist, right? Which is what you endorse, anarchocapitalism. So we kind of tried this in a sense. It was actually anarcho-syndicalism that was the original basis of the server. Now, we could make rules. So you're saying it means no rulers, but not no rules. Okay, so say we're all equal, right? There's nobody on a higher level. The round table is all on a flat plane politically. But then you're saying we could still have rules. Okay, so you say, well, okay, even though there's no ruler, there's no highest guy, we don't want the N-word, right? We don't want you to say the N-word, right? That rhymes with digger. We don't want you to say that, right? But why does that matter? Nobody cares what you said that you shouldn't say if you're saying there's no ruler. That's an inherent contradiction. You're saying, okay, there's no ruler, so there's no guy to say, hey, no N-word. But at the same time, we're all just going to say no N-word? That makes absolutely no sense, right? Because I can tell you, people will come in here and say, I'm going to say the N-word because I want to. And if it wasn't for me or some other mod stopping them, they would just go ahead and do it. You couldn't be like, hey, we agreed that we're not going to say the N-word. And they said, so who's going to fucking stop me? Right? And the answer is obviously nobody. This is why we have police. This is why we have moderators, right? And any other rule you could possibly make would have no meaning if there wasn't some kind of government or ruler who made that rule a rule. To say that there would be a rule but no ruler is like saying there would be a word but no speaker, or an art but no artist, or a idea but no thinker. It's literally incoherent. It makes no sense. Either there is a ruler to make the rules, or there is no ruler, there is no rules. So you cannot say it's an anarchist system. It's not lawlessness. It's not lawlessness. There's still going to be laws. There's just no ruler. Well, by definition, only a ruler can enforce the law, and only with the power to do so can they do so. So imagine if we had all the same rules that we have in this server, right? In the rules channel, no racism, no anti-Semitism, no homophobia, no slurs. But then there was no moderators, and yet you can't understand how that wouldn't work. Like, it's like saying we'd have rules, but no one to enforce them. Then there are no rules. Like, this is incredibly simple. So if you are an anarchist, you have to accept that what you are endorsing is no laws, no rulers, no anarchism. True anarchism is nothing more nor less than a shark tank big shark wins. The only thing that moderates that is some kind of rules. If you're in a UFC fight and there's no referee, then you can poke each other's eyes out. Because you poke each other's eyes out is against the rules, there's no referee. So it makes no difference. This is so simple, dude.
But you think it's so simple, yet you can't understand the simple concept. We live anarchy every single day. The better question is, what anarchy isn't? I mean, you go to a grocery store, that's anarchy. You're speaking a language, that's anarchy. You get marriage, that's fucking anarchy. But sadly, government comes in and tries to be the third party to all these things that we naturally do every single day. You're saying that life is going to be a fucking lawless nonsense. We're living anarchy every day, but sadly the government sits there with a gun to your head 24/7 doing that. And then to go to, like what Stein was saying, scientist or whatever his name is, it's saying like how an anarcho-capitalist system's nonsense, and it's fucking unrealistic in that. It's fucking going on every day. You live in a capitalist system, a crony capitalist system, say. But you do everything you want fucking freely every day, but if you don't listen to what the government says, so laws you didn't even agree to, you're gonna get fucking put in a cage and put in prison. And that's the thing I preach against, and that's why I don't understand why Shogun thinks, and he's building up this straw man that's been debunked for centuries, that you can't have rules in an anarchist society. That's completely untrue. It means no rulers, not no rules, and I know what you mean. Well, you can't have a rules without rules. We all know that murder, theft, rape, assault, trespassing, and coercion are bad. You don't need an authority to tell you that unless like you're religious and you'll say that's like a whole God type of thing, and that's morals bound to the nature. You never that type of stuff.
I'm actually really glad you brought that up. Again, tell me if I'm roboting, because you've said this a few times. You said we all know that murder, rape, etc. are bad, and I'm sorry, sir, but this is totally incorrect. The reality is there are huge percentages of the population who have no problem with murder, rape, torture, child abuse, child slavery, cutting the eyeballs out of a child, cutting the vagina off a child, raping a child with a knife. Right? I wish this wasn't true, sir, but this is the actual reality of the world we live in. There are many people who have no problem with cannibalizing children, torturing children to death, raping children, creating child sex trafficking organizations, cults based on sadism and torture. And if your mentality is, oh, we don't need the state to fucking establish these, yes, we do. That's why we have it. That's why it's necessary to have laws against these things. Is because if we didn't have laws against these things, people would do these things. And people do these things even though there are laws against these things. And that's how police officers are trained to do things happen. Like, if you were just that everyone would just be like, yo, we don't need to rape each other or kill each other or steal from each other. We don't need a government. You really think we just invented laws and police and forensics and intelligence because nobody did these things? No, we invented these things because people do these things. And if there isn't a state to stop them, then there isn't a state to stop them. It's not that fucking hard to understand that if people are raping their kids and pimping their kids out, you either have police who go in there and say, this is against the law, you're going to jail, or what you're saying is, how much can you pay for private security? We can pay more. That just means the rich can do whatever.
The rich can do what they want anyway, no matter what. But what I would say is that in America, you guys are allowed to, defend yourself with lethal force. So you already have like a kind of anarchic system going on there because you can shoot an aggressor if you have to. And also the idea you're saying that you need specialists to do all these different things, to police things. You really don't, because the specialists take 5 minutes to arrive to the scene of a crime, and if it was a theft, they won't bother investigating it. If it was a murder, they're too late to get there. Or like a mugging, they're too late to get there. If it's you with your own, you're responsible for your own physical strength, and so you're ready and you're strong with your community, and you get raided suddenly, at least then you're actually allowed to kill those people, so they are never a problem again. They're dead. This tiny percentage of people who will murder and rape and pillage, they'll be killed off. In a police nation with like the state and its police and military, they don't respond in time to those things. And so actually you would be safer if you had the freedom to fight back against those issues. And if you didn't have to spend all your time working for like the state or being scared that you'll be arrested for protecting yourself.
No, but that's totally nonsense. The point is you can defend yourself. The state allows you to defend yourself. If I get attacked, I can kill the person that attacked me. The state allows me that right. But the point is if I'm weak and fragile, see, I'm strong. Like, I can kill people myself with my own bare hands. My ex-wife couldn't do that. My daughter can't do that. My future wife can't, girlfriend can't do that. So the point is, when you keep saying, oh, freedom, all you're saying is total powerlessness to the weak. Like, I don't need the state. I can fucking kill anybody I fucking want. But the reality is most people can't. And that's why you have to have paid people from the state who fucking protect them. Because what you're saying is if you're broke and you can't afford private security, then anyone can come cut your head off and cut your family's head off. And you're saying if you're weak and you can't defend yourself, anyone can come rape you. That's why the state exists. The state doesn't exist to fucking oppress you, right? It exists to defend you. It wouldn't need to exist to oppress you. They could just oppress you through anarchism. I could come and be like, I'm stronger than you. I'll put my boot on my neck. Give me all your money. The state doesn't exist to do that. It exists to prevent that. Like, the whole reason there is a state is so you don't have to suffer the tyranny of the strong. If you think you're going to be free without the state, you're going to find out what the tyranny of the strong is, my friend, and it's going to be a dick up your ass.
Yeah,
That
but
ain't true, because you can protect yourself. You can shoot or stab them. You could be a skilled swordsman and be smaller than the opponent. If you cut their throat, they're dead.
The thing with that, though, is it's a matter of also if enough people come at you with
tyranny.
if enough people, what is it called? There's a big thing with, like, you guys talking about hiring your private, like, what is it called, security or whatever. That's one thing. Hiring your private military and owning your own tank or APC is a completely different story as well. If you have your own military, you can take over groups of people. Even if they do band together, they won't be big enough to take on an army. Even if you have like a common ideology between like even everyone in the let's say all the countries or the states inside the United States decided to go, capitalist anarchy, right? But they all agree that they would still band together for a military or whatever. That's one thing, but it's still going to be a lot harder defending the state or even individual states or countries or groups of people with certain ideologies from someone who has enough money to hire their own private
Reason why
also
this conversation is so frustrating is because nobody is addressing what the other person said, and the same points have literally been repeated the entire time.
Well, let me say something on that point then, Ralph. Because here's the thing, right? So anarchy is the primordial state of mankind, right? It's not something you have to defend or advocate for. It's the default. We start in the state of anarchy. That was where the game started, right? When the game of humanity started, it started with anarchy. There was no law, there was no government, there was no rules. Only through a brutal and vicious Game of Thrones that went on for thousands of years did we establish the privileges of things like the rule of law, the rule of order. This is not, anarchy is not something we have to achieve. It is literally saying, let's go back to square one. Okay. Anarchy is nothing more than a power vacuum. So once you say, okay, we have a state of anarchy, all you're saying is begin lawless death battle. And then first person to win lawless death battle establishes state and then establishes law. And only once state is established and law is established is there anything but lawless death battle. when you say you want anarchism, you're just saying let's take all the things we've achieved, like laws, government, order, constitution, human rights, ethics, morality. Let's throw that out the window and go back to anarchy. And then I will chop your head off, right, and every lesser man, and take all your women, and then I'll say this is the state of Shogun. Welcome to the new state. Congratulations, anarchy. This is gate level 1. Like, that's
I don't know if this is like, this must be the kind of debate where each side thinks that if they repeat their points more than the other side that they win, but like there's some pretty obvious low-hanging fruit from both sides of the Shogun. There's an assumption on the part of, there's an assumption on the part of the anarchist position that there's something natural in the heart of man that allows them to make free choices, where the market will have a demand where it will demand from corporations that they not hire child traffickers. So if the market changes and demands child traffickers, what is to change it in that state? And then from the other side, there's many such underlying assumptions that Shogun's statement have, which are also unaddressed. Just, your system bad, my system good. Your system bad, my system good. Either of you have justified, investigated, analyzed, or synthesized why either of that is the case.
So the thing is, it's not your system. This is why this is the kind of the funniest of all debates, because it's not your system bad, my system good. That would be the normal debate, right? Where it's like, you're a communist, I'm a capitalist, or you're a Democrat, I'm a conservative. But this is system bad, no system good. So you're literally just saying no organization, no leadership, no rules, no law, nothing other than whoever has the most money can hire better security. That will somehow be better than constitution, law, human rights, like social organization, voting, democracy. It will be better if all that matters is who can hire the best private security. That's all that ANCAP comes down to. It's just cartel rule. They can hire the most people, the most guns, do whatever the fuck they want.
And see, this is why I'm so glad that that's why I wanted to be an open discussion. And Raul makes the beautiful point, which is why I wanted an open discussion, is that we're not getting to each other, which is why I want other people's inputs, because they're going to have a different perspective. Because all I'm trying to say is that your government is inherently evil, and the evils that it has done throughout human history have been documented, and it's vast, and it's scary. That is inherent to a government. When
Why is it inherent? You're making a claim that it's inherent. Why is it? Explain it. Justify the claim.
That's what I was saying earlier, that monopoly on violence and coercion, I believe that is evil, and that has led to all the evils that government has done throughout the years, such as democide, which is death by government, not people in battle, but civilians and innocent people killed by government. And in just the 20th century alone, 1900 and 1999, over 266 million people, innocent, not in battle, have died because of government. That's enough bodies.
Okay, well, you don't like the government, but why? What's the problem? The monopoly or the violence? And if it's the monopoly, and if it's
the monopoly and the violence that have been done throughout the years and have killed hundreds of millions of people in the 20th century alone.
So you remove the monopoly, you still have the violence. You haven't solved the problem with your system. If it is the monopoly that's the problem, how will non-monopolizing it or breaking up the monopoly solve the problem?
Because I'm trying to say that government justifies all that evil, when in an anarchist society it isn't justified. That's the main thing. Because humans aren't going to be fucking signing up to be dominated by a government 24/7, other than what has been done, especially in the U.S., due to a social contract that no one signed, but due to fake implicit consent, they're forced to abide the rules that they didn't even agree to, which is why I understand a government or community where people voluntarily agree to be ruled upon by a gun. That's fine. If you want to sign up for that, that's fine. You can sign up to be in like you said, there's UFC. You can sign up to be in a death match with swords, and if you don't care and you voluntarily agree, you can cut each other's heads off. That's the beauty of human nature. If you fucking agree, you could do whatever you want. You can smoke crack out of your ass. You can do all the stuff. I mean, that's the beauty of humans. But the evil that comes from natural humanity that Shogun keeps bringing up is natural inherently to the government. And that's why I keep saying to him is that he hates all these evils that the government justifies, and the government has exacerbated all the issues, which is why I bring up the democide that Raul interrupted. But hundreds of millions of people in the 20th century alone have died because of government, and they're not even on the battlefield. That isn't even counting people on the fucking battlefield, and there has been so many people that died in the 20th century that is equal to if there was a nuclear fucking war, but spread out over a century. That's how bad it is. That's why I don't support government, and I understand that what Shogun's is going to say, well, you just don't understand what anarchy is, because anarchy, it doesn't mean that you can't have rules and anarchy and all this stuff's nonsense. Oh, I just don't like the evils that are inherent to government, but he's saying that it's, basically necessary because all these evils are going to happen without government. So why not have a bunch of evil people controlling other evil people?
If I can reiterate the point, right? We both that there are huge problems with government. Everybody who's reasonable gets this, right? There's been genocides, there's been wars, there's been murders, there's been unethical tortures of people, right? Like, I'm Canadian, so I'm in a better position, but even my government accomplished a lot of horrible things. And in America, there's the MK Ultra. In my country, there's the residential schools, right? So evil shit was done. But my point is simply this. The solution to bad government is not no government, it is good government. Right? The solution to bad fighting is not no fighting, it's good fighting. The solution to bad cleaning is not no fighting, it's good cleaning. So the position of anarchists is like, look, the government did bad, there should be no government. But any logical position would be, oh, the government did bad, we must reform it into a functional, successful, meritocratic, competent, benevolent government that knows what it's doing, it needs to do, and does it well, right? So it's like, this idea that you have to me is almost like, oh, this one girl I knew hurt my feelings, so now I hate all women, and I'm going to be a MGTOW for the rest of my life. It's like, no, the solution to this one girl being bad is not no girls, find a good girl. It's the same with government in a weird way. It's just like, you can't be like, oh, look at the bad things they did, there should be no government. That's crazy.
Women aren't inherently evil. Maybe some guys would disagree with that, but women aren't inherently fucking evil, unlike a government, and that's what I'm trying to say. You can't change the evil that the government does. There are going to be good and bad women, so I don't know what this, and you brought up a dad earlier, that they're not even correlating.
Yeah, they are, because all I'm saying is, like, you had two choices, right? If I have one bad experience with one woman and it didn't work out, should I say I'll never have any women again, there should be no women? Or will you look for a woman with different qualities that'll work out better? And the same applies to government. So if you tried, a democratic government, it didn't work out, and you're like, look, they did this, this, and this. They killed the dogs, and they pissed on the fucking nuns, and they shit on the fucking priests. I don't know, whatever bad thing they did. And you're like, all right, we'll never have government again. That would be dumb. You'd be like, no, we need to look at, like, what went wrong with this government. How did we elect them? What were the policies oversight that existed? Like, it's just the point I'm trying to make is how simplistic it is to be like, I'm not satisfied with one outcome of the concept of, like, government, which has infinite numbers of variations of how you could actually do government, and be like, therefore all government is bad and no government is an answer. It's like saying I had an allergic reaction to peanuts, so I'm never going to eat food again.
Well, the irony of what you're saying is, your position is kind of similar. You're kind of setting something to the extreme, where I believe, ztaco, he's on to something. Obviously, there needs to be order, right? But a good government would allow its people to govern themselves. So that would mean if those people want less restrictions of being governed, they should be allowed to do that, and that it may, I guess, be anarchy, but it's really just allowing people to do what they want within a system that is morally good.
Yeah, let me stress to Shogun that I preach just mainly the anarchy. How you want to go about it after anarchy's fine. I know I said this before, but I just wanted to say that. But you can't have a government that isn't a monopoly on violence and coercion. That's literally inherent per the former president of the United States. It is literally what a nation state is a monopoly on violence. No matter whether the government is better or worse than others, no matter what, the foundation of a government is a gun to your head 24/7 per what Shogun said. But he's saying that even in natural life, in nature, there's a gun to your head 24/7. I'll tell you, when I'm hanging with my friends in the woods getting high or whatever, the biggest guy isn't having a secret gun to my head 24/7. I understand Shogun's point, but humans can function without a government, and I get that he's saying only the strongest will survive, and it's a power vacuum. And like I said before, and I wish he'd acknowledge, is that the state itself creates a power vacuum, which in history we have already seen in the likes of Mao, Stalin, Hitler, Pol Pot, and more. That is literally what happens when you have a state, is these tragedies happen and are justified, and then after they happen you're like, oh my god, that was fucking insane, we have to do it better than these guys. That's what I don't want any of that. I don't want any monopoly on violence. That's just all I preach about. It's a very simple ideology, and I know Shogun's just going to think it's idiotic or whatever, but I just preach for basic human freedom without a gun to the head, which Shogun says is what the government is, and I don't think that's benevolent. I don't think putting a gun... If I walk to my friend and said, I'm the bigger dude, I have a gun to your head 24/7, that's just how human nature is, he's going to be like, dude, what the fuck? I'm not going to chill out with you anymore. I'm not going to smoke weed with you anymore. I'm done with this shit. I understand your point, though, Shogun, but it's a little extreme, and it happens already with the government with a gun to your head 24/7, and it's already ended bad.
So I want to respond to this. Actually, I'm glad I feel like you did a really good job of nailing the issue down here, and this is exactly what we need to understand. So you're right. If I was walking down the street with, say, 5 of my friends, and I was the biggest and strongest guy, and I would have said, look at them and be like, I could kill all of you. I got a gun to your heads. That would be really weird, right? But the reality is, if I didn't say that, it would be just as true. I just wouldn't have said it. So there is, in fact, a gun to their heads, right? But it doesn't matter because they trust me and they like me and I'm their friends. So the point of it is this, is like what you said is, it's not benevolent to have a monopoly of violence. There shouldn't be a gun to people's heads, but this is like saying there shouldn't be gravity, right? Or the day shouldn't be where the light is and the night is when the dark is. Like it doesn't matter what you think about it. Strength is strength is strength is strength. Power is power is power is power. So if I am walking down the street with you and you are like some really fragile, weak person and I'm a big MMA fighter, I do have a gun to your head. This is not like a moral decision you get to make whether I should or shouldn't. This is a simple fact. I can easily kill you at any time and you cannot easily kill me at any time. So what you seem to be struggling with is like just the simple realism of it. And when you say there should be no, monopoly on the use of violence, that's like saying there should be no gravity. It's like saying people should be able to flap their wings and fly into the sky by flapping their arms. That's a meaningless thing to say. So to say there should be no monopoly on the use of violence is like saying there should be no gravity. It doesn't matter. That's an absurd thing to say. There's always a monopoly on the use of violence, and the point that you get so completely ass backwards is thinking that the state exists to make that the case. The state exists because that is the case, and if the state didn't exist, there wouldn't be someone inhabiting the position of the most powerful force, and then there would be a never-ending anarchic competition, which is nothing more than what created ISIS or what happened in Syria, right? If you take out the existing hegemon, every region of power has a hegemon. The hegemon is the most powerful force. So in the server, people are not constantly battling for power because they know that I have the most power. That's the reality, and therefore there's no need for a struggle. If that were not the case, there would be a never-ending battle. And it's the same in any other context. So what you fail to understand is the only way to prevent the need for a power struggle is to put one person in power who has all the power. If there's any competition, there'll always be war. It doesn't matter what you think about it. You can't wish fire not to be hot. If there isn't a hegemon unifying the power structure, there will be war and conflict. This is the most basic fact of human existence.
I don't think that they don't necessarily a hegemon. It's just we're both anti-state. It's just that the hegemon and the power kind of gets put into different places. It becomes decentralized, or the patriarch of the household makes more decisions, or even in some cases it could be like a defense guild of warriors makes all the decisions. It just depends. It's not put into the hands of a few professionals, and then everyone else just has to be these like underperforming, underdeveloped human beings, domesticated human beings like we've become. That's my opinion on anarchy and why we should have it. Go ahead, though.
Well, yeah, the thing, like, Shogun says, like, violence is, like, it's going to happen, like, monopoly on violence is going to happen with or without government, whatever, and that. You agree, like, based on, chilling with your friend or whatever, that they're your fucking friend. Like, okay, I'm going to chill with this guy. I understand that, okay, this guy is way bigger, he can fucking snap my neck in a second, but, through relations and all that, he seems like a cool guy, this and that, whatever. He isn't, he could be violent, but it doesn't mean he's inherently violent. It doesn't mean that he's always, just because he's big, he's going to inherently want to dominate me and control me. Unlike in a government, it is inherent that they're going to have use violence and coercion against. That's what I understand. Violence can happen in human nature. Violence happens under the government too. But you're saying, it's going to be less of the government, less violence because of the government.
That's correct.
The case. I think government has only caused more violence, but they've justified the violence, and you can only count through human history: World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, Yemen. I can go on and on. We're a conspiracy thing. We know everything bad government's done, and guess what? All these bad things happen because of government. And like Raul was saying earlier, we keep going back and forth, and it's not getting anywhere because all I keep saying is that government isn't justified in doing these evils because who the fuck wants to have something initiate violence on them 24/7? If you have a dick friend that can break your neck, that's a dick friend. I'm not going to be his friend. No one is signing up for this.
I would.
Years.
Yeah.
Wait, Ralph, please. I really want to respond to this. So, if
Are you
you
gonna make the same point for the 90th time?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's the issue.
No. But what I'm saying, this is the last thing, then we're gonna close it up. But all I'm saying is, you said if you have a dick friend who can break your neck, I don't want to be his friend. No, this has nothing. It has nothing to do with being a dick. Like, he just has the physical ability to do that. He's not saying he wants to do that. He's not saying he's threatening to do that. He's not being a dick in any way, shape, or form, right? Like, so the reality is, and again, people are like, this doesn't understand. No, but I'm almost never in a room with someone I couldn't easily kill, right? And that doesn't make me a dick. That's just a reality of the situation. So what you keep assuming is like the implied gun to your head of force is not an actual gun to your head of malevolent intention. That's like saying, if I'm 400 pounds, do I have the ability to pick you up? Yes, I do. Does that mean I want to? No, I'm probably not even thinking about it. But the point is, other people will use that force against you. But anyway,
I got 100% of the content that was given.
Ahead, let's wrap this up after that.
I got 100% of the content that was provided in the last hour and a half from the title alone. I think what would be helpful for both of you guys is to learn a word called cross-examinations, is where you ask questions of the other side rather than to restate your original claim for an hour and a half ad nauseum.
Well, first of all, it wasn't just the two of us. It was opened up for the audience quite a long time ago, so if you had some insightful input to make, you could have done so.
Just a little side note, I didn't say the guy just because he can snap your neck is a dick. I'm saying if he does snap your neck, that's a fucking dick move.
Well, of course it is, and that's the point. The whole point of the state is to prevent the abuse of force, because the fact that whoever has the monopoly on the use of violence or force, whoever's the most powerful, the most violent person, the fact that they can control any situation it's a fact of nature, like 1 + 1 = 2. The whole reason the state is so important is to be like, okay, we are already the elite warriors who control everything. Should we be like reckless brigands who just rape and pillage, or should we be like some kind of orderly state that protects everybody? Those are the only two outcomes. And the reality is that most states have settled into the benevolent configuration where people, although they have machine guns, don't go around shooting everybody. But if you look at Mexico, they do go around shooting everybody. So there will be no situation in which a dominant violent force with a lot of guns doesn't control everything. The great thing about states is because they have like badges and medals and laws and they go, oh, you did a good job. Then we don't just go around killing everybody. But in Mexico, they'll just chop your fucking head off. So it's like there is, you think you have a choice between like people having power and people having no power. That's not a choice. That cannot be obtained. Power will always exist and you will never have it. You want people to be benevolent who have it.
Yeah, obviously that's a nonsense in my eyes showing. Go ahead, Romulus.
I missed some of this, so if you already went over this, forgive me. It seems to me that there's a distinction between monopoly on violence and just violence. I don't think that anarchy or anarchism is a pathway to utopianism. where there's some kind of idea that there's a removal of violent behavior. At least I don't think that's his position, or I've never heard an anarchist put forward that as a position. And one other, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying I agree. I do not preach for utopia. Go ahead.
And the other point is the one on the individual in the group who can snap necks. I mean, and kill. And where I live, everybody I know has a gun, a conceal and carry gun. So the ability to have violence enough to kill is held by most everybody privately, and so there's not necessarily a monopoly on violence. So I would question if there's a level, if it's, as long as it's not monopolistic, is there can we have franchise of violence, or how would you go from what's less than monopolistic enough that would satisfy the anarchist?
So I'd like to respond to this. Actually, is an interesting point. So what you're observing is that in a place where it's easy to own a pistol, the ability to kill others is easily obtained, and therefore there's some kind of balance. But even in such a situation, there is in fact still a monopoly on the use of violence. It's just you're not aware, you're not privy to who that is, right? It's not necessary that anybody knows who it is, but there will always be such a person. So what that means is not one person has my gun is more powerful than anyone else's gun. No, it means there's someone in whatever area you're in who can bring to bear more people with more guns, with better guns, who are better trained, who are better funded, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not nearly as simple as saying, I have a pistol, you have a pistol, therefore there's no monopoly on the use of violence. It's if I make a phone call, 100,000 people will get out AK-47s to go kill everybody. Can you do the same? No, you cannot. If I make a phone call, I can transfer $40 billion into this arms sale. Can you? No, you cannot. So it's a much more than just I have a pistol. There's no monopoly. No, there is. You just don't know who has it, but somebody.
So the
knows.
point is, the distinction is between absolute monopoly versus monopoly. Usually the argument is between legitimate violence and illegitimate violence. Some states have a monopoly on the legitimate use of violence, but Shogun, I think your argument is that they have, it doesn't need to actually be a monopoly. It just needs to be a significantly outweighed monopoly, and the issue of legitimacy is not addressed.
Yes, well, I want to point something out. So the whole reason I oppose this so strongly is simply because I believe there is such a thing as the monopoly on the legitimate use of violence, and that is what we call the state. The state is, by definition, this is social science, whatever force has the monopoly on the legitimate use of violence. Now, the problem with anarchy is it means there is no such thing as legitimate or illegitimate. Because if it's an anarchic system with no leader, then there is no one to make that adjudication of what is and isn't legal or illegal, good or evil, allowed or not allowed. And the idea that this, loss of the ability to establish moral categories will somehow lead to a good result is absurd, because it means you can do anything, chemical, gas attacks, whatever you want. It's always going to be better to have an adjudicator of morality than no adjudicator of morality. And when people are defending this anarchist position, they think it will get rid of the monopoly on violence. It doesn't. All it gets rid of is the morality of violence. It just turns a morally restricted use of violence into an unrestricted use of violence. And it can never be a good outcome for humans, except for those on top.
It could.
All I want to say is this, so very briefly, final point. If you are not on the top in terms of wealth or the ability to bring to bear violence, and you're defending anarchism, you are like a deer defending wolves.
That's untrue.
Sorry, this question's for the anarchist. How does it enter the concept of volunteerism? How does that enter into restricting or managing, like what he correctly points out, that there's always, the bigger and badder badass, there's always the bigger guy, there's always violence. So how do you contend with that in this volunteerist model?
Well, I mean, it depends, how you go about your society. I'm the capitalistic society, so I go about privatizing everything and hiring the feds. But the thing is, what Raul was bringing up earlier, what with like the thing is like legitimate versus illegitimate, and then like Shogun said no, it's legitimate violence versus illegitimate violence. Which I don't know how Shogun plans to have the people agree to his system. So I'll ask now: how do you plan to have these people join your system, Shogun, your government? Do they vote you in, or are they there through a social contract? How would that happen?
Repeat the question.
How would people go about joining your government society?
How would people go about what? Sorry.
Joining your government. Like, how are people going to be a part of your government?
I've done whole podcasts about this, but basically the whole system of a meritocracy is based on identifying the most promising candidates from the earliest possible age, and then recruiting them into a program based on education, relentless and never-ending system of education, testing, and competition. And this would essentially refine over time to the highest degree those who rise to the top of the most difficult system, right?
Now, the people underneath.
Curriculum. And then
those people that are ruling, how do you get into civilians that come underneath your government society? Are they signing to join your government society? Are you thrusting them into your government society?
Right. In any country, once you're born in a country, you're automatically a citizen of that country. So if I'm born in Canada, I'm automatically Canadian, you're automatically an American or whatever it is. So there's nothing to that. The point is only that the elite few, who are the most highly qualified or capable, have the most potential, would be recruited into the administrative caste. But everyone else, as is the case already, would simply be citizens by virtue of being born in a given country.
Right, so you'd have people be part of your government through a social contract that they didn't explicitly sign, but they're implicitly agreeing to be living there, right?
Well, you're automatically a citizen of whatever country you're born in. There is no alternative to that. That's just the reality. If you're born in Germany, you're a German. If you're born in Israel, that's how it is. Like, that's not an anarchist or other position. That's just a reality. All you could do is renounce your own citizenship, but that's not like even a position. That's just a reality. You are born a citizen in whatever country you're in, whether you like it or not.
Okay, so you're dragging these people into your system because they were born there, and I get that, social contract, you're just there passively, and then, maybe at a certain age you'd be able, to get out of there or whatever, but the thing I like to point at that, Raul bring up earlier is the legitimacy. I don't think that you have legitimate implicit consent through probably most of the populace that are going to be living in your system. Comparing it to the U.S. system, Russia, Canada, and Europe and stuff like that, no one is validly, implicitly agreeing to that. I mean, you could say you're implicitly agreeing due to passivity or that consent through using our services or this and that. That isn't valid consent due to the underlying nature of what government does. So the whole consent thing, that's going to be the big issue with your government, because I guarantee when people have to sign up to be part of your government, whatever age they want to be, however your government wants to do it, no one's going to want to sign up to be ruled by a gun 24/7. And that's the main thing with government, is that no one's fucking signing up for it. And everyone's thrust into it, like you said, just because they're born there and that's human nature, you can't change that or whatever, okay. But I don't think that it's valid that just because they live there and do everything, that they're consenting to your social contract laws. That's what you need to understand. I don't think you have a legitimate rule over these people. I think it's illegitimate.
So I'll touch on that real quick if I can. So this idea of obtaining consent, this already exists. It's called a birth certificate. As soon as your parents request a birth certificate to signify your birth at a harbor or a hospital, you essentially are consenting to being under rule of the law of the whoever is in control of that land or in control of that sea. So as much as most people aren't aware of it, people are already consenting to become wards of the state by agreeing to a birth certificate. And this is how this already exists, and it wouldn't change after the fact.
Yeah, but that's where valid consent comes in. I don't think that it's right for them to be able to have control over you just because you had a baby there. That's where the underlying issues of the 4 types of valid consent come in. Just because it's implicit doesn't mean that it's valid.
So this is what I want to point out, though. This is actually a different situation. So this is not a case of being forced into something against your consent, like circumcision was. This is actually a force of inheriting important and beneficial thing by virtue of being born somewhere. So if I'm born in Canada, I don't inherit some negative thing that I didn't consent to. I actually inherit a very positive thing, which is citizenship in Canada, which has a huge amount of benefits. So this isn't like, oh, I didn't consent to this, you put something on me. This is like I was born with a gift, and this belongs to me. And a lot of people in the world would literally kill to have this, but I have it by virtue of where I'm born. So you're not being burdened with something against your will. You're inheriting a gift that a lot of people can and do kill for.
It's not inherently a gift. I mean, you're just inherently becoming a citizen of a country. I don't think everyone would 100% agree that's a gift. I mean, there are people that, of course, would want free healthcare, free this, and free that. That's great. But just to say everyone's going to say that's just completely untrue.
No, it isn't, because people literally drown trying to, cross rivers or oceans on little rafts. Like, you're being naive here. Like, citizenship is a gift. It means you have rights and that you have like an opportunity.
It also means that you have responsibilities, and those are the things that he has an issue with, like paying taxes and being forced to follow a set of laws you may or may not agree with. As a member, citizenship has a big entailment. But in conversations like these, I always find it helpful, at least to begin, with axioms, establish first principles, maybe see if you can get some agreement on there, and then reason from there. But it sounds like we're getting close to some of them on this idea that, legitimate violence requires legitimacy. Legitimacy entails at least for one. So we're kind of moving backwards, So my question would be, what establishes legitimate violence, and how does each system do so? So just asking to justify the claims that are being made, essentially.
Well,
I can establish legitimate violence, but go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, Rob, they started this whole, I don't know if you were here in the beginning, Rob, but they did start off asking basic axiomatic questions, yeah. Well, it did start with just basic premise questions.
But if the question is what establishes legitimate violence, that's what I have a great interest in, right? So legitimate violence is only possible in 3 situations, if I'm correct. So the first principle of violence is minimum necessary force, which is as soon as you use more force than is necessary, you reality. All right, but force is not applicable. And then the secondary point is you can only really use it to defend yourself, right? If your own life or integrity of body or person or property is threatened, or that of your family, or that of an innocent third party who doesn't have the power to defend themselves. Those are the only qualities, right? So you attack me, I can fight you. You attack my wife, I can fight you. You attack my property, I can fight you. And you attack some innocent child, dog, or woman, and I can fight you. Those are the only cases where violence is legitimate.
Well, that's not really answering the question of justifying something philosophically. You're just saying how it functions, what you would say that legitimate violence does. But I'm asking about the process of legitimization.
No.
And I think one component that was brought forth was consent makes it legitimate. But it sounds like your answer was actually not those things make it legitimate, but instead that morality. So the reason why it's justified is morality.
Well, morality and legitimacy are the same in my worldview. So if something is moral, it's legitimate, and if it's legitimate, it's moral. These cannot be separated. But I will point out that yes, you added a fourth one, consent. So if violence is consensual, then it is ethical. So competitive sports being an example. But in terms of like real deal violence, it's either you're defending yourself, your family, or an innocent third party. Because if you're using violence aggressively to be like, okay, well, that guy had a bunch of fucking coke and I wanted that coke, so I killed him. Well, that's not ethical. But if someone's attacking you, your family, or your friend, or some innocent person, it is ethical. That's pretty much all it comes down to.
Well, then you have a flaw in your system. If the government is doing something immoral, then it loses its monopoly on violence. Or is that consistent with what you're saying?
It's legitimate, right? The government cannot misuse its legitimacy. If the government loses its legitimacy, then obviously it's not legitimate. I mean, That's obvious point. So now, if you can't be government start attacking someone to steal fucking this frame or whatever the hell they have, I don't know. Then all of a sudden Canada could become, lose its legitimacy, and then someone like myself could no longer, serve them in any way without being unethical. But as of now, look at my government and say, yes, I can legitimately serve my government as the legitimate hegemon. But they could lose that by doing something unethical.
Just to sort of like, we don't want to be stuck here forever. I just wanted this sort of maybe I guess say end. I don't know if you want to end yet, but the thing, like we're talking about legitimate and illegitimate consent or whatever. I'm on the side that governments are functioning through illegitimate consent, non-valid consent. I don't think anyone in your government, your meritocracy or any other government, I don't think anyone's going to be explicitly agreeing to join something like that. No one's going to be signing a contract like that. That's why most of these governments function through people implicitly consenting through all this stuff. Like I said, through passivity and all that stuff. But the implicit consent isn't valid because the government doesn't hold up its side of the validity. And there's 4 different types of valid consent. I don't know if you want me to go through them. It might take some time. But my point is that your government is not going to be valid unless people legitimately sign up for it and abide all the valid consent means.
So I just wanted to say, you can say something comes in, but I think this was a great episode. It was a really good discussion. I enjoyed it a lot. And it is pretty much a good place to wrap it up. So if you wanted to say something comes in, go ahead, and then we'll give Taco a chance to make a closing statement, and then we'll close the podcast.
So this idea of giving consent and signing up and signing a contract, this already happens. This is what the birth certificate is. Your parents, as your guardian, are giving consent to the government to make you a ward of the state at the moment of your birth when they create a birth certificate. This already exists. And yes, I agree that it is not... it is what's the word? It is a type of subterfuge. Your parents really aren't even aware what they're signing, right? They just are told that your child needs a birth certificate, so you must sign said contract that they don't really show you the fine print of in the first place. So this idea of obtaining consent, it already exists and has for a very long time. And I see going forward that it wouldn't be much different. And there was one point you raised where you said, the idea that citizenship is a gift, and you disagreed. Imagine a world where when you were born, you did not receive citizenship, and you had to reach a certain age as a non-citizen before you could acquire citizenship. You wouldn't have any of the equal rights to all of the things the citizens had. You would literally live as a type of what's the word? Like somebody who's completely excluded from the society, just completely like an outcast until you can acquire it. So you're given it at birth as a gift.
You have a dying giraffe in the background. Just want to point that out.
Well, I think this was a great conversation. Thank you, ztaco. If you have a closing statement to make, please do. And if you want to talk again in the future, I'd love to do it. But what would be your closing
super. Go ahead. I don't know what you were saying.
No, as soon as you talk. This was our podcast. So I think if you make a closing statement, please do so to wrap it up.
Yeah, so I'd just like to close super quick responding to Raven, just that I don't believe that's valid consent. I understand that's implicit, and I get that. But just as a closing statement, I'm not going to close out anything on my point of view. I just like to say that I'm glad that it was at least a bit of a lively discussion. I'm glad that people seem to have their own viewpoints and care about it. I'm glad that this wasn't like a dead discussion, just you and me talking to each other. I'm glad that people have their own viewpoints, and I'm glad that at least in the end, everyone seems to be going for the good in the end, whether it's through government or through anarchy. And that's the main thing I really care about. I know I preach about anarchy, but, I'm just glad that everyone's at least in the server from out here just sort of looking at the good side and trying to end on a good note, no matter how the path to get there. So I'm just glad that it was a good discussion. I'm glad I went for a little bit, and I'll glad to do it again another time.
Yeah, that was a blast, actually. I really enjoyed that. Thank you very much, ztaco. Appreciate it. And thank you very much, everyone, for participating. It was a lot of fun. So I'll conclude now, and we can jump up to round table 1 for further conversation tonight. But please do follow us on YouTube and BitChute. and Podbean, where you can find our 200 plus RT podcast episodes. But most of all, join the Roundtable Discord server. Just Google that, you can find us. And we record the podcast every day at 8. We'll do another one tomorrow. It'll be a lot of fun. We got a web store and a lot else going on, so join us upstairs.